people to drop questions in the chat throughout the presentations, and speakers do feel free to then respond in the chat. As ever, there's never enough time for all of the conversations that we want to have in these events, so feel free to branch off and have your own as well. I also would like to emphasize that we're going to be recording this event, as you all just heard very loudly, and we'll be putting it on all of our social media channels, so you'll have a chance to share this more broadly with your audience after we finish. So without further ado, I would love to hand things over to Ruka.
Okay, thanks, Amy. I'm assuming you want me to put on my video, right? Yeah.
Yes, if that's possible.
Yes, I think it is. Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone here present. Like Amy said, I have the privilege and the responsibility of heading the team at the Ghana Climate Innovation Center here in Accra. But in setting the scene today, I've been asked to outline the connection between climate responsibility and also innovation, referencing the work of the Ghana Climate Innovation Center. And I should start by saying that GCIC, what we do is that we're proffering solutions to and responding to climate responsibility within the context of private enterprise and entrepreneurship. And we do that with a unique focus on the small and growing business sector. And added to that, GCIC is particularly interested in working with and supporting women entrepreneurs, responding to the unique challenges that women in the business sector face, and the unique needs that they have in transacting successfully in the marketplace. So I will start by briefly stating who we are, our what and why, and then I will move on how our supported entrepreneurs are developing and using locally responsive innovation to counter the climate emergency. So GCIC is a national business accelerator and incubator. And through a competitive search and selection process, we support enterprises from across Ghana who have climate innovation, usually a climate adaptation innovation in the areas of climate smart agriculture, energy efficiency, solar power, water management, and domestic waste management, as opposed to industrial waste management. So, I mean, that is our what. Our why, however, is premised on the reality that the marketplace, and by default, the business sector, delivers to us tremendous goods and services, which we consume every single day of our lives. But the challenge is that the vast majority of those of manufacturing processes and operations utilized to bring those goods and services to the marketplace often involves the emission of perilous greenhouse gases. Our why is to redress this. And our why is to redress this through the SMEs, the small and growing business sector, because we believe that these enterprises are potentially the big business of tomorrow. And if we can get them to start thinking about climate responsibility, to start thinking about innovation now, when they grow up, so to speak, they'll be more responsible businesses, manufacturing more ethically, and using cleaner production processes, and therefore bringing better, more responsible goods and services to the marketplace. So within our context, I mean, let me just give you one example of what I mean by that. So across West Africa, rice is a staple food, right? From Gambia to Sierra Leone to Nigeria to Ghana, we just love our rice, right? But you know, unfortunately we actually import a lot of the rice that we eat. But some 2 or 3 years ago, just to give an example, the government of Ghana was encouraging more consumers to eat locally produced rice, and this was wonderful. Also because during Christmas we gift bags of rice to employees and all of that. So there's really a huge rice market throughout the year, but also particularly during Christmas. But the problem is that the farming methods that we use to agricultural methods that we use to actually produce rice produces a lot of methane gas. And so the challenge there is, okay, how do we still sort of like ensure that the local economy prospers from this food that we eat day in, day out, as opposed to having it imported, but not actually, pollute the atmosphere. So the challenge and the solution to that could be one of innovation, and the notion of problem solving by climate smart enterprises that, that the likes of GCIC would support. So we see our work at the nexus of economic development, private enterprise, ecological prosperity, and so what did I say first? Climate change, economic development, ecological prosperity, and economic development. But we also have an emphasis within all of that on gender equality. We focus our content on creating joint value for society and for the entrepreneur as well. So for us, innovation is problem solving for climate responsibility. I'm going to show a slide, and if it doesn't work, Amy, I think you have the same slide, which seeks to concisely sort of like explain what it is that I'm getting at. I'm assuming that you can see what if you can see my screen, right?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Wonderful. So, I'm not going to, I mean, you can all see it and you can ask questions afterwards, but I've just got some notes here just to ensure that I quickly make all the points that I need to make. So you may see me looking down. Our hypothesis is that economic development is fueled by private enterprise. And obviously we want to develop, we're an emerging market, we want to economically develop. But our premise is also that resourceful management of natural resources form much of our natural societal and national capital, which in turn equates to ecological prosperity, right? The challenge is that economic development and private enterprise have functioned as a trade-off of ecological prosperity. And the climate emergency that we have is an outcome of that. So what this slide sort of like speaks to is the notion of joint value, okay? And having joint value for society, joint value for the entrepreneur, joint value in how we create jobs, joint value even in how we finance the work of entrepreneurs, how we finance the private sector to bring goods and services to the marketplace. Economic prosperity, I mean, just looking at the slide, I want to talk to you a little bit. The insight and commercial acumen and the luck that any entrepreneur has can bring him or her and their organization tremendous profit, and also brings a tremendous amount of options, choices, happiness to the consumer. Where innovation comes in is when an enterprise or an organization with a particular notion of ethics, of values, and leadership decides that their operations, their manufacturing processes are going to be responsive, not only to the needs and wants of the consumer, but responsive for the endurance and the survival of the environment and natural resources. Where innovation further comes in is to deliver to these goods, to these needs, and and wants profitably. I just want to end this short sort of like setting the scene by just saying that one of the challenges that we have found with what it is that we try to, with what we do and advancing climate innovation and climate innovation in the business sector is this whole notion around climate financing. We're all aware that private enterprises is funded by banks and non-bank financial institutions. And in emerging markets, this is also supported by the donor community as they support us to redress the structural rigidities in the marketplace. What we do not have, we need to create our innovative and new financial instruments directly available to entrepreneurs and enterprises, either through intermediary organizations that work directly in this sector, or institutions that they can access more readily and more directly. Because what we see is that the limited financial instruments that exist are largely procured through, and forgive me for saying this, but bureaucratic third parties. And I don't want to name any names. I don't want to get into trouble. But with these institutions who are sometimes even largely based in other territories and are working through some of our government institutions and public sector organizations, the enterprises who actually fuel the economy, the SMEs, just don't have access to this green finances. So green financing. So we feel that new instruments are needed to respond to the financing gaps of the small and growing business sector. And we find that the absence of these is actually stifling climate responsibility and the innovation that enterprises such as the ones that we support have. So I'll stop there, and thank you for your attention.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ruka. I'm just going to pause and see if anyone would like to come off mute to ask a question. And if not, I'll move on to our MLC presentations. And I'd be particularly interested as well as the members speak if you all agree with Ruka's call for the need for more flexible green financing mechanisms. Because I'm sure that's things that have come up in lots of the work that we're about to hear about. So there is a comment in the chat, Ruka. I don't know if you can see that. Maybe something you can address in the chat function. Kozia, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Yes, really interesting presentation and really excited for the opportunity to get to know you better. I wonder if you could provide a brief example of how you worked with an agri-SME, maybe an agro-processor through your organization. If you could kind of walk us through the services and the impact working with one of these agri.
Okay, so let me just kind of think. So one example could be an enterprise in the north of Ghana that is working on how to increase yam yields, right? So around food security, because for every time that you plant the yam seed, you lose, like, I think it's 30% of your harvest, because you whatever you harvest, 30% of that you have to sort of like replant. And also a lot depends on seasons and the weather and all of that. Now, what innovation? So they've developed an innovation that actually increases that you don't need to actually replant 30% of your harvest for the next harvest. And they worked with I forget this institute's name in Ibadan, that actually help them to develop more resilient seeds, so that that can be done. We also have another enterprise that was just really needed. Fonio is one of the power foods that we have in West Africa, but and it's climate resilient, and it's a serious power food, but we're just not growing enough of it, and we're not eating enough of it, because it's actually it's a very small seed and very, very tedious. I understand in production and sort of like collecting for harvest, and it's mostly done by women because it is so tedious. But yes, yet it's packed with a lot of nutrients. So, and like I said, it's a climate resilient crop, right? So it's drought resistant and flood resistant and all of this. So our support with that enterprise was really to get the number one, because a lot of the clients are actually based in the United States, right? But how we exporting this power foods and not really eating it internally. So can we get so our premise was how can we do a lot of marketing for this organization to get people to understand better about the health benefits of Fonio, and also to, they're creating jobs, they're creating jobs for women, and also just to sort of like heighten the knowledge about the fact that it is a power food. It is something that we're not eating enough of. And a lot of the other food crops that we eat, actually, they're not climate resilient. So we're also losing. Yeah, so that's another example of an agricultural enterprise that we worked with. I don't know whether that answers your question.
Yes, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Ruka. We're now going to move on to our first of our Million Lives Club member presentations. And first up, we have Steve Metcalf, who is Head of Partnerships and Communications at Water and Sanitation for the Urban Poor. Welcome, Steve.
Hi, everybody. And yeah, thank you, Amy, for that introduction. Can you hear me okay? Just to check first. Great. Okay. So thank you to Million Lives Club for organising this event and inviting me to speak today. I just wanted to start off by introducing the challenge that we are working against to introduce water and sanitation for the urban poor very quickly. So there are over 900 million people around the world living in vulnerable urban communities, poorly built, densely populated, often illegal settlements, which lack even the most basic services like clean water or access to a toilet. And this number is growing year on year. And this challenge of urbanisation is really the reason why Water and Sanitation for the Urban Poor, or WSSUP for short, was set up to try and extend access in these communities to clean water, safe sanitation, and to improve hygiene practices. And our innovation, if you like, is the way in which we work to address this problem by building long-term partnerships with the institutions at a city level who are sort of set up and have the responsibility to solve this problem. So often these are the water and sanitation service providers, to publicly owned companies who are mandated to serve all people, but really lack the ability to do so. And we also work with community-based operators, private operators, regulators, municipal authorities, etc. And we work principally in 7 countries in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia, and we have a consultancy arm which implements projects in other countries as well. So just to outline a few areas where climate change is affecting people's ability to access clean water and sanitation. So firstly, extreme weather, such as cyclones, which causes great damage to infrastructure, and in poorer communities where sanitation waste is generally not safely managed, risks this waste mixing with flood water and causing severe risks on public health. So the image on the slide is from Beira in Mozambique, it's a city of around 600,000 people, where the vast majority of people live in informal settlements. And you can see that the devastation on the picture caused by Cyclone Idai in 2019. Secondly, droughts, which obviously is reducing the amount of water available, and this typically causes a disproportionate impact on the poorest, so those who are typically not served already have to queue for water or pay maybe over the odds to get water. And the photograph is from of the Victoria Falls in southern Zambia, where that cliff is normally a torrent of water, and it really just slowed to a trickle a couple of years ago, causing a severe issue for the city of Livingston next to it.
I'm so sorry. Yeah, can't see your slides.
Hang on a second.
You did a beautiful job of explaining the picture, though.
Can you see it now?
No.
No. All right. Any better?
No, sorry.
Okay, no worries. I'll carry on. The pictures are amazing.
You can share them after.
I'll share them after. Okay. So the third, and then the third risk really is around climate migration, and particularly an issue in countries like Bangladesh, where climate change is causing rural to urban migration. So in Bangladesh, believe that around 700,000 people every year are forced to leave villages and move to urban areas because of climate change. And you can imagine the pressure that this is putting on urban authorities who simply are unable to cope with the demands for clean water or sanitation service. So in all of those three examples, we are working with city authorities and with the water and sanitation providers to try and respond, to plan better, and to build services and to build more climate resilient services. But there's lots of challenges with this. I guess there's two main challenges that I'd want to outline. Firstly, the institutions that are providing these services are really not being properly available to plan for climate change and to recognize the threats that are coming. They're very much living kind of day to day, looking at the crises of now. COVID over the past year being a prime example. They're underfunded. They lack the right skills in place to really deal with the problem. And I think the incentives to change also are lacking. The regulations maybe are not there. The poor lack a strong voice to advocate for change. And the pace of change is so quick in cities, even maintaining the status quo can be quite difficult. The second challenge, I think, is that we in the water, sanitation and hygiene, the WASH sector, have not successfully demonstrated how improved water and sanitation services would make a difference to climate resilience in cities. And so it seems to me that when mayors, when politicians, when top leaders are making their decisions and are planning for climate adaptation, WASH is just a long way off. It's not in those discussions. And I think we need to do a lot more to connect more with the climate community on that. So in terms of, so I was asked to come up with a few recommendations for donors. So, so the first recommendation is that donors looking at climate adaptation should focus more on resiliency of water and sanitation services and recognize the role this can play in climate adaptation. I think the second recommendation is around looking less at communities and looking more at the system as a whole. So water itself is very much a system. The way it flows around cities is a system. If you fix problems in one part of that system, that can improve services in another part, in another community, but also the sort of the political system as well. So looking at improving regulations, as I mentioned, to drive those incentives. And then my third recommendation is looking at capacity building within the public sector. So we really need to work with the public sector to help them understand the issues, the problems that they're facing with, and to provide them with the tools really to come up with solutions. That's it. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Steve. That was fascinating, even without your illustrative pictures. And I'm really interested in what you said about building the case for the link between WASH and climate resilience. And I'd be really interested to know if other members in different sectors kind of feel that there is this disconnect between climate as a silo and the sectors that, you know, interact with it, also siloed in the same way. So maybe that's a discussion we can pick up. I'll pause and just see if anyone has any questions for Steve before I move on to our next presenter. And if you can't think of something right now, then do feel free to drop things in the chat, and I'm sure Steve will be more than happy to respond to you there. Okay, I don't see any hands at the moment. So I think we will move on to our next presenter, who is Laura Stachel, who is the Executive Director and co-founder of We Care Solar. Welcome, Laura.
Mute. Thank you so much. Let me just see if I can share my screen.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Zoom has it out for us today, clearly.
How are we doing? Is that okay?
Yeah, that's good for me. All
right. Wonderful. Well, thanks for the opportunity to join this really important discussion. As you mentioned, I'm the Executive Director of We Care Solar. What I want to bring your attention to begin with is that tonight, tens of thousands of health workers are going to be going to work in health facilities that don't have modern electricity. They're going to be using candles, kerosene lanterns. Some of them may have the luxury of a diesel fuel generator, but it also means that they're going to be struggling in near darkness, and that babies like this one may be taking their first breath in smoky air. And this is not a rare occurrence. A study was done recently showing that in 78 low and middle income countries, 59% of health facilities don't have reliable power. And WHO reported that in sub-Saharan Africa, 1 in 4 health facilities have no electricity whatsoever. And this issue of energy poverty in healthcare is contributing to the very high rates of maternal and newborn deaths. We know that globally 300,000 mothers and more than 1 million newborns lose their lives every year from complications of pregnancy and childbirth. So We Care Solar is a nonprofit that was founded in order to try and save lives in childbirth by making solar power simple and accessible, in particular to last mile health centers. And in addition to improving direct care for mothers and newborns, our programs are helping to reduce CO2 emissions and improve environmental health. The innovation that's at the heart of our work is called the We Care Solar Suitcase. This is an institutional grade solar electric system that was designed specifically for healthcare. It's rugged, it's safe, it's easy to maintain, easy to use, and is long lasting with lights, for example, that are good for doing cesarean sections or deliveries, and that last for 70,000 hours. In addition to energy production, it also is focusing on high efficiency end appliances. So these lights that you see range between 1 and 5 watts, which means that they're using very little energy. We also include medical devices like a fetal Doppler, and now with COVID, we've begun to include infrared thermometers with rechargeable batteries that charge off of the solar suitcase. And in addition, we have headlamps that charge from the suitcase, and we have cell phone charging and charging for other devices. We take this case, and in situations where we have permanent health facilities, we install them on the wall, put solar panels on the roof. And we have seen that our programs improve medical procedure lighting, the ability to diagnose and treat patients, the quality of care, the ability to immediately provide care. In fact, when health facilities don't have electricity, many of them turn away patients at night because there is no way to provide care. And it's improving access to universal health care. We see that more families are seeking out care through the night when they know that lighting is provided. In addition, it's really helping to assuage the terrible fear that health workers face trying to provide life-saving care in darkness. So we see both improvements in morale and improvements in confidence of health workers. And when the solar suitcases are included in multi-intervention maternal child health programs, we see dramatic changes and reductions in maternal mortality, newborn mortality, and as mentioned, increases in utilization. Our programs work by leveraging partnerships. We partner with governments, with international NGOs, local NGOs, UN agencies, trying to basically piggyback our programs on top of existing infrastructure. We work to educate health workers on how to use our equipment. But even beyond that, we are working to try and train a whole cadre of technicians to be able to do solar installations, to be able to maintain solar electric systems, and to be resources in their own communities. And we also are promoting gender equity through our Women's Solar Ambassador program, where we're trying to give women skills and leadership positions in STEM fields. Using this model, we've reached more than 6,000 health facilities, trained more than 26,000 health workers, and we have served more than 7.5 million mothers and babies by providing a safer childbirth experience for them. Most of our work is in sub-Saharan Africa, but we've also done work outside, for example, in Nepal and in the Philippines and in Puerto Rico, when climate change events have actually disrupted energy access to health facilities. And I'll be coming back to that a little bit later. And as far as environmental impact, by replacing fossil fuel sources of lighting, we're seeing improvements in air quality, greater safety, a reduction of CO2 emissions, and a reduction of black carbon, which contributes to premature mortality and morbidities. To date, we've averted more than 66,000 tons of CO2 through our programs. Healthcare Without Harm released a report in 2019 talking about the impact of healthcare in general on climate change. And it turns out that actually the health sector in general is a very big contributor. Even though I've been talking about energy poverty, if you look at industrialized countries, they actually contribute to about 4% of the global net emissions of greenhouse gases, the equivalent of 514 coal-fired power plants. And they say if health sector were a country, it would be the 5th larger emitter of greenhouse gases. And that's both through energy consumption, through healthcare transport, as well as through the products that are manufactured, used, and disposed of through healthcare. How do we take action? Well, in addition to trying to treat people who are suffering from healthcare problems from all of the climate changes and things that were just being talked about by the last presenter, it's really important for healthcare to be a leader in phasing out fossil fuels and showcasing the use of renewable energy. And this has to happen simultaneously with working towards health coverage. And as far as what development agencies and funders can be doing, it's really to try and integrate climate smart principles. And I'm just going to talk to finalize the talk. It's a little bit about what We Care Solar is doing to take action. One is that we launched an initiative called Light of Rebirth, which is calling for the end of energy poverty in maternal health facilities. We believe every woman has the right to safe deliveries. Every health worker is entitled to reliable electricity, and that solar energy is an immediate and sustainable solution to this problem. And we're now working at the national level, working country by country to try and ensure that every woman can access safe deliveries. Liberia was our first Light of Rebirth country, followed by Uganda, then Zimbabwe, and Sierra Leone. And in those last three countries, we're still working to reach the last facilities there. We also know that solar energy can help health providers working to try and serve patients who have been affected by climate disasters, and having solar power as a distributed, immediately accessible form of energy can be helpful in that area. And finally, we also have an education program because we're trying to educate the next generation of solar innovators so that young people can try and be sort of the problem solvers of tomorrow. And that program is called We Share Solar, and it has its own website if people are interested there. So I think I've used up my time, but thanks for letting me at least scrape the surface of the things that we're doing at the intersection of so many of these sustainable development goals.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Laura. I'm going to pause there and see if anyone has any particular questions. I see a hand up there from Alexandra.
Yes, thank you. Very compelling and very exciting to learn about your work, Laura. I have a question about to what extent is it a challenge to provide upkeep and maintenance to the actual infrastructure, and what does that entail for the communities and for you, for your organization?
Yeah, it's such an important question, and I think I tried to give a little bit of an inkling of the way that we're actually trying to work with partnerships on the ground. And the way that we're doing sustainability is we actually enter an MOU with the Ministry of Health, and we train their health technicians, the ones that right now are doing things like vaccine refrigerator maintenance. And so we then give them the skills to be able to understand and to maintain the solar electric systems. We've actually made these incredibly easy to maintain. They just require a simple battery change at 5 years and ensuring that the solar panels can be wiped clean if they get covered with dust. So there aren't huge amounts of maintenance problems, but we do work to bring in supply chains for any of the appliances that we supply with the solar suitcases that may fail over time, to help them think about how to get lithium ferrous phosphate batteries into countries that may not have those. And it's a real partnership that happens with the government. And in each country, we kind of work with them to develop what sustainability plan is going to work in their local context.
Thank you for the additional detail.
Thank you so much, Laura. That's really interesting. And thank you for your question, Alexandra. I think something that I'm noticing as we go through these speakers is the emphasis on systems change for climate responsibility. And I'll just give a small plug for another Million Lives Club event that we're doing on the 22nd of September on reimagining global health systems. So Laura, I'd absolutely love to invite you back again to talk more about how you envision reimagining a global health system that has climate responsibility at its core. Yeah, great. So with that, I will now pass over to Alexandra, back to you, who is the Chief Programs Officer at Root Capital. Welcome, Alexandra.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen in the hopes of sharing pictures as well.
Perfect.
You see that?
Yes.
Great. All right. Good morning and afternoon. And thank you, Million Lives Club, for the great work that you do and for inviting me to share with all of you today. So my name is Alexandra Taenstra, and I'm the Chief Programs Officer at Root Capital. For those of you who aren't familiar with our work, we're a nonprofit whose mission is to grow rural prosperity and build the resilience of farming families around the world. We support the growth of agricultural enterprises through access to finance and training so that they can in turn transform rural communities in Latin America, in Africa, and in Indonesia. For these communities, climate change is not some far off threat. It's an everyday reality that is currently flooding their fields this week in particular across the globe, causing infestations in their crops and putting their livelihoods at risk. So I'd like to start there with the people on the front lines of our changing climate. Meet Maria Elena, coffee farmer in Nicaragua. Maria has been farming coffee for decades on about 2 hectares of land. This farm is her family's main source of income, but now she wonders whether her children will follow her as coffee farmers. Because in recent years, Maria has seen the weather change, making coffee production a lot more difficult. 7 years ago, climate change contributed to an unprecedented outbreak of the coffee leaf rust. It was a major crisis. It killed 40% of her particular coffee trees, slashing her income that year and for years to come. More recently, rising temperatures and decreased rains have resulted in droughts, causing her coffee yields and her income to fall. This picture is from Nicaragua, from coffee growing regions. She worries about covering farm costs and feeding her family. And if conditions don't improve, Maria and her family may have no choice but to migrate in search of a better future. Maria is just one of 500 million smallholder farmers whose livelihoods are threatened by climate change. The World Bank predicts that the effects of climate change could push an additional 100 million people in low and middle income countries into poverty over the next 10 years. Despite these urgent threats, the world has been slow to support smallholder communities. Today, only 4% of global climate finance goes towards agriculture, leaving rural communities largely to fend for themselves. Against this backdrop, Root Capital is pleased to share our commitment to double down on climate action with rural communities. The businesses with which we work, cooperatives, associations, agro-processors, and aggregators, are rooted within the local communities, and they're attuned to and they're invested in the local needs for the long term. They're often anchors in vulnerable places where other institutions are weak or non-existent, and each impact the lives of thousands of farmers. Collectively, they serve as a platform for grassroots, locally designed, and timely climate action at scale. In the face of climate change, Root Capital seeks to build their resilience. But what do we mean by resilience? We mean essentially the ability to manage disruption, to adapt and even thrive in the face of shocks. Resilience is not a state of being. It's a set of capacities, of capabilities that enable farmers, businesses, or even entire communities to not simply bounce back from all these shocks, but to bounce forward into a reimagined, more sustainable, more inclusive, and hopefully more prosperous future. Over the next 5 years, Root Capital will work with our clients to build their resilience to climate change and to other shocks, to ensure that these businesses remain sustainable engines of impact locally for their communities for many years to come. So today we're pleased to share what our strategy is to realize this next horizon, and we call it our Climate Resilience Roadmap. It describes 4 key pathways to achieve our vision of climate resilient businesses and communities. And it leverages our proven credit and capacity model, as well as key partnerships, to Amy's earlier point. So first, we'll grow our lending to businesses that are already committed to climate action in rural communities. We finance businesses that are on the front lines of climate action. We call them our climate action leaders. These are businesses that proactively support climate action in their communities by activities like reforestation or training in climate smart agriculture. Last year, 76 of the 185 businesses that we financed fell into this category. By 2025, we'll grow that number to 125 businesses that collectively serve over 375,000 farmers. Secondly, we cultivate business and farmer capacity to adapt to climate change. Agricultural enterprises need a lot more than just capital to prepare for climate change. They need information on how climate change will impact their particular business and their lives, and guidance on how to prepare. Many simply did not have access to any kind of climate change training. For those that did, The training was often a one-time sort of generic session without a lot of follow-up, if any at all. So we launched a new line of advisory services to address these gaps, a climate resilience advisory service that takes a tailored, grounded in data, whole business approach to climate action planning. It considers market dynamics, financial realities, local agroclimatic conditions, and we accompany the enterprises over multiple years. We leverage the best available climate data from partners and from these businesses themselves to create actionable plans together with them. Over the next 5 years, we plan to build the climate resilience of 125 of these rural businesses. Third, we innovate on financial solutions to unlock local investment in climate action. As climate change unfolds, these businesses and farmers will need to make new investments, for example, in composting facilities, in greenhouses, or in drip irrigation equipment. Yet, smallholder businesses and their suppliers largely lack access to the capital to make these investments. Most banks don't serve these enterprises. They perceive them as too costly or too risky. Root Capital seeks to design and deploy financing solutions that blend investment and philanthropic capital to help close this gap. Over the next 5 years, we'll scale promising climate finance products within our own portfolio of more than 200 borrowers that reach altogether more than 665,000 farmers. And we also commit to sharing lessons learned, which leads me to our final pathway. Knowing that no one organization can solve this massive global problem, we will amplify successful solutions to encourage adoption and replication by others. We have experience doing this. Over the last 20 years, we've helped build the industry of smallholder agriculture finance, showing the world that agricultural enterprises are bankable and attracting hundreds of millions of dollars to rural communities. Now, we want to help direct global climate action and commitments to rural communities. And we want to do this by building the impact case for these businesses as local agents of climate action, by blueprinting models for building their climate resilience through a combination of our capital and capacity building, and by sharing our learning more broadly with global climate action practitioners and funders. So as you can see, we have an ambitious road ahead, and we can't do it alone. For more information about the details of our climate resilience strategy, including an executive summary of the roadmap that I just outlined very briefly, and how you can help, please do visit rootcapital.org/climate up here on the slide. And if you have any programmatic questions, or if you're interested in how you can support this work, please feel free to send me an email. And thank you again for the opportunity to speak here today.
Thank you so much, Alexandra. That's such a fascinating strategy. And I really see that very clear link with Ruka's earlier call for blended climate financing models. And also, I obviously, coming from the Million Lives Club, love your focus on amplifying successful innovations and initiatives like this. So thank you. Would anyone have any questions at all before we move on to our final speaker? I will say there's one question in the chat from my colleague Liv, which I wonder actually if, I know it was geared towards Laura, but I actually think maybe it's something that all of our speakers today could respond to. And it's if you've noticed any changes in terms of the demand side signals, donors and partners actively seeking solutions that are more climate responsible, or on the basis that the solutions themselves are climate responsible. Do you think that the landscape has changed significantly in recent years? Alexandra.
Oh, that's for me. Sorry, I thought you were sending that out to everybody.
Well, all in fact, but I'll start with you.
Sure, happy to. There's definitely a shift, an awareness, right, that I think is most welcome and wasn't there before. I think the challenge is what do we do with that interest and with that demand, and how do we invest most appropriately? Where are the best solutions, right? And that's where this kind of platform and conversation like today, that is where we share real experiences, becomes so important. And I think something that we've all been sharing so far is that there are a lot of solutions and ideas for how to use those investments locally, and tapping into that and really taking our role as a bridge between the desire to fund adaptation and change and the solutions that exist on the ground, that is key to our success.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's such an important point. I'm glad you brought it up. And I think maybe I'll throw that question out to the rest of our speakers if we have time at the end, because I'm sure you will have extremely interesting perspectives on it. But for now, I will hand it over to our final speaker, who's Ashu Sikri. They're the Product Strategy Manager at Digital Green. Ashu, are you there? Hi.
Yeah, I'm here. Hey, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, perfectly.
Great. Well, thanks for having me, and really excited to speak after so many of the interesting folks that have come just before. I'll start with a quick introduction of Digital Green. So Digital Green is a nonprofit that works to empower small-scale producers, smallholder farmers, primarily in South Asia, Ethiopia, and a few other countries. We've been around for about 15 years, and one of the core things that we've done is video-enabled extension. So what that means is really leveraging the power of partnerships and technology, in this case video, to educate farmers about production practices that can help them increase their yield and increasingly increase their climate resilience. The way that this kind of community video model works is that we work very closely with existing extension programs, typically government extension programs that are operated at a state level. And I'm talking about the Indian context here. There's already this network of extension agents that are communicating with farmers. Historically, that work is done through demonstration plots or through documentation that's produced by agricultural universities. And what we've done is worked with those extension agent networks to build their capacity to actually produce and disseminate videos that demonstrate those same practices. And if you think about some of the behavioral elements here, that approach has been proven to be much more effective at actually reaching farmers and driving adoption of practices. So what happens is local community members get trained on how to produce videos. Those videos feature local farmers demonstrating the practices that are being promoted. And then there's a larger network of extension agents that are trained in actually hosting video disseminations. And these are small community gatherings, 20, 30 people in a room, videos are projected. And there's a facilitated discussion that takes place where the videos are screened, people respond to questions, and there's follow-up that happens every few weeks throughout the cropping season to answer any questions, and eventually data on whether those practices are adopted, are tracked and fed back into the system so that we can iterate and improve the adoption rates. And so this is a program that we've done at large scale, over 2.5 million farmers globally, about 2 million in India, and another 500,000 in other geographies where we operate. And there's been independent assessments, including RCTs from folks like JPAL and others that have proven that it's effective. The practices that are promoted increase adoption rates by 40% versus traditional methods. The practices actually increase yield, in some cases by up to 30%. And it's more cost effective, right, relative to doing in-person field schools and the other techniques where we've seen estimates of about $3 per adoption using the Digital Green model versus $24 and up for traditional methods. So, and the last thing I'd say about the community video model is that we're really proud in that a lot of the extension agent networks we work with actually work through existing self-help group structures, which are collectives of women, right, that have come together for purposes of microfinance. And so a lot of in fact, the majority of the farmers that we reach through this approach are women. So that's what we've done for many years. And I think, the purpose of this talk is to kind of showcase what we're doing when we take a climate lens. Agriculture is interesting. It's a huge contributor of greenhouse gases, and specifically methane and nitrous oxide, which are actually, when you look at a 20-year global warming potential, even more of a driver of climate change than carbon dioxide. And we work with small-scale producers. I think everyone recognizes that small-scale producers are the most vulnerable when it comes to climate shocks, right? And others, earlier have spoken about this. And so there's a critical need to sort of grapple with climate change, in large part from an adaptation perspective, right? In response to erratic weather patterns, change in yield that's happening as a result of those patterns, pest infestations, et cetera. But also, interestingly, we think from like a mitigation perspective as well, right? There's things that farmers do that actually can reduce emissions, right, and actually serve as a carbon sink. And there's some there's real power in that activity. And so the focus for us going forward is really to start to understand how we can build on the success of that community video model to continue to promote adoption of practices, but take a more explicit climate lens in what practices are promoted. So for example, when you think about climate smart practices in agriculture, there's actually a lot of win-win potential. Practices that have strong evidence behind them, that help reduce yield scale emissions, that increase income by virtue of reducing the amount of money that's spent on inputs and fertilizers and other kind of chemical inputs, and also increase resilience by improving soil health and growing crops that are better suited to local agroecologies and more capable of withstanding some of the climate shocks that are increasingly coming. And this is critical in a world with increased incidence of extreme weather events. So for us, that integrating that climate lens into the community video model is critical. And what's important there is to recognize that what is applicable in a given context is not a one size fits all, right? Local agroecology matters a lot. Local soil hydrology, local weather patterns all matter a lot. And so as we think about tailoring advisory messages with our government partners, doing so based on local conditions and looking for those win-win models, right? So reducing application of nitrogen fertilizers, tree planting, managing water through irrigation and other techniques. The other bit that comes next is, once we've got these practices, is to actually verify practices and be in position to actually quantify what their climate impact is. And the approach we're taking there is that we're working again in close partnership with our government extension partners to record those practices, and we're working with a number of existing climate models to help calibrate and validate them for the Indian context, so that the information that we're gathering can actually start to build an evidence base of what different practices on the ground result in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, and increasingly things like water usage and biodiversity as well. What comes last is, once you've gathered all this data, is how to put farmers in a position to actually leverage this data for their benefit. One channel is to improve market access. As you look at shifts in the value chains that these farmers operate in, there's an increased emphasis on reducing Scope 3 emissions and having transparency and traceability into how food is grown. So a verified record of what practices are being followed, coupled with an estimate of what kind of emission footprint those practices have, can be quite advantageous in terms of accessing markets, and also increased and improved access to finance, right? So if you think about access to credit or insurance products, producers that are following practices that are more resilient are inherently less risky, and some of the more sophisticated providers of financial services are recognizing that. And as we continue to build this evidence base of practices and how they relate to emissions and environmental outcomes, we think that farmers will be in position to sort of take all this data that's being gathered through the government extension system to actually be able to leverage that for their benefit. I think we're a little tight on time, so I'll pause there and maybe we can have a chance for following up on questions.
Yes, wonderful. I think that was a really fascinating presentation. Thank you. And obviously dovetails really nicely with Alexandra's work. I'm sure you guys have a lot to connect on offline potentially. I think we maybe have time for one question if anyone has something burning that they'd like to say, and then we will have to sadly wrap up. As I said before, there's never enough time in these events. So I'll just pause for a second. Okay, well, I would really encourage people to, if you would like to get in touch offline, drop your email addresses into the chat. In the last couple of minutes, you could gather up some last minute contacts, because that is really what the Million Lives Club is about. It's connecting innovators from around the world who are doing amazing work, as we've heard about today. So with that, I would like to close out and thank you all of our speakers, Ruka, Steve, Alexandra, Laura, and Ashu. I think this conversation has been really fascinating in highlighting the cross-sectoral systems-based nature of climate responsibility, and how that this conversation is something that needs to be happening a lot more frequently than it does, I would say. So just to end on a few tiny bits of housekeeping, I already mentioned our next event will be on the 22nd of September. It's going to be on reimagining global health systems, and I imagine there'll be a lot of links with what we talked about today. And then finally, many of you may know me as that person who chases you a lot over email, because the Million Lives Club are redoing our website. So if any members out there have not yet filled in their form, please do so at your earliest convenience. Message me if you have questions. The website's going to be fantastic, and we'd love to showcase your work as best as possible. So with that, I'll say a final thank you and a final farewell, and I hope that we meet again soon. Everyone have a great rest of your week.
Thank you.